Welcome to this episode of The World According to Irina Tsukerman, our very special series on global politics on the KJ Masterclass Live. Irina is a US-based national security and human rights lawyer as well as a renowned geopolitical analyst. Her writings and commentary have appeared in diverse US and international media and have been translated to over a dozen languages. Every fortnight in The World According to Irina Tsukerman, we traverse the geopolitical landscape and delve into pressing international issues and gain insight from Irina's expert perspective. Welcome to the show once again, Irina.
Thank you. Glad to be here as always.
Welcome. And again, several big topics here. Again, Donald Trump's first few days in office, a lot of, question marks here. People are asking a lot of things, chaos, accomplishments, and also perhaps revenge. We'll have to understand how should we look at this. Will you say it's a great start, not so good start, or a disastrous start?
Well, it's been a very mixed bag to say the least. There were some good things done. For instance, putting the Houthis back on the foreign terrorist organizations list was, as I predicted, one of the first foreign policy moves by the new administration, and I think it was greeted by most people except for the Houthis themselves. Of course, coinciding with the ceasefire, the Houthis announced that they will be pausing the attacks unless the ceasefire is broken. So it's not really clear whether what the impact of the new designation is, but it will, regardless of what happens, make it much more difficult for them to secure new funding and to use loopholes to trade and travel around the world spreading propaganda. So that's definitely a long-term positive effect. Most of the focus has been thus far on domestic matters. Of course, the Middle East envoy has made his first trip abroad. It's not clear what the outcome of his meetings in Saudi were so far, but he was one of the few U.S. officials to travel to Gaza, and he also met up with Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel, and it looks like Netanyahu will be the first foreign guest invited to Trump's second term for White House visit next week. On the less positive note, there's been quite a mess concerning Greenland, including a horrendous, as multiple sources described it, phone call with the Prime Minister of Denmark, which led to Denmark meeting with France and other European partners to form a potential defense alliance, possibly against the United States, which is not something that I thought I would see in my lifetime, but we are living in very strange times. There's also been a bit of a upheaval over the freezing of foreign aid, which has affected not only humanitarian aid to various countries, but also counterterrorism and weapons-related aid. And there are some exemptions for emergency humanitarian assistance, but overall, a lot of disruptions, contractors getting fired, people leaving jobs. Apparently, the administration offered a federal buyout to employees, but no one knows whether that's legal or not, and whether anyone will actually believes that if they voluntarily resign from federal services, they will in fact be compensated. The freezing of federal funding domestically, Medicaid and other programs, was a bust. There was confusion over what was and was not supposed to be frozen. Websites were not working for 72 million people. So in the end, they canceled the whole thing, but no one sure what exactly was supposed to be canceled to begin with. So that's still being undone. And of course, there are also hearings for various officials ongoing. RFK Jr.'s hearing was earlier today, and it was quite a disaster. It was probably one of the worst hearings for any official, for any administration that in my recollection, at least.
Absolutely. Irina, so for those people who are watching it purely from a foreign policy, as well as how Trump is coming out up to his domestic audience, what should they understand what is it that Trump is trying to achieve now that he is the president, both in domestic terms as well as in international terms. There must be some image that he wants to create.
Well, that seems to be themes so far to his presidency. One is campaign promises, which is primarily now focused on border security, and we are seeing that there was even an episode with Colombia, which initially refused to take back migrants, which resulted in sanctions, tariffs, um, and within hours that was cancelled, and President Petro was sending his presidential plane to assist with this effort. We're seeing that Guantanamo military base is being repositioned for dangerous criminal migrants. About 30,000 people expected to be moved there. Prime reason for that is that there aren't sufficient facilities that are both secure and big enough to house that many people with violent record. However, for those wondering whether Trump's mass deportations are actually something unprecedented and could be executed, in his first term, he only deported 1.5 million migrants. Compare that to 5 million migrants under Obama, and actually as many as 12 million during the 8 years of the Clinton administration. So we are actually looking at numbers that are similar to or comparable to past presidencies, and in fact, if anything, they could be lower than what we've seen before, because arguably the over the years the number of illegal migrants who have remained in the US accumulated. So we're not just talking about the new numbers in the recent years, the Biden administration, but cumulative of several past presidencies. So that's one theme. Another theme, of course, is revenge. We are seeing mass firings of even career employees, not necessarily Biden's appointments, who were in any way displeasing to the new administration, starting with the prosecutors involved in federal cases against Trump, and just general national security staffers, State Department staffers, and general federal employees, and assorted bodies that most people probably are not even aware of in any way affiliated with the U.S. government. The most shocking, however, was not his revenge against the civil servants, which many refer to as deep state, but his treatment of his own past personnel, including former Secretary of State Pompeo, Brian Hook, and others, and John Bolton, who were not only Hook was fired from a position with the government affiliated think tank. All three lost security assigned to them due to the threats from the Iranian plotters, which also included Donald Trump himself, and also clearance is being pulled from former head of Joint Chief of General Miley. So he is not only losing his clearance, he might be facing a review which could have him lose a star. So yes, so this sort of revenge is the third theme, of course. The second theme, and of course, the third theme we are seeing is deals, and more deals. There's expected to be a call with the Japanese prime minister focused on a major energy deal. Of course, executive orders are reversing a lot of the Biden-related energy policies. We heard about a phone call with Saudi Arabia about investment opportunities, and other economic opportunities are already under discussion with the partners around the world. So we can certainly expect that. And one reflection of this focus on business is the return of big business into the fold with the government, actually more openly and bigger than even under Biden. So this sort of business orientation is certainly going to be a major theme for this presidency.
Right, Irina. But I'm still trying to understand. I saw those images of Brazil, some of the people who had deported back to Brazil, 70, 75 of them, and they were handcuffed. And there was this whole lot of controversy around the Brazilians also were protesting against all these things. Government protested. Those images are not good. Is it don't you think this is bad PR in terms of you have to deport them? But why to create such a impression that governments themselves have to come out? Even if you see Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, he's in Panama. Greenland, you talked about the Denmark PM and the collision that they are creating for themselves. And here Musk is going to Germany. He addresses AFD gathering, sparks controversy. Even Poland is now talking about, he's telling them to move beyond past guilt. Help us understand what is it. Aren't they also worried about the geopolitics, about the feelings of countries here? And that might not, America is a powerful country, but then a lot of small countries also make a powerful situation against the US.
Well, mm, to start with Musk, many of the things he's doing are not necessarily part of his official mandate. His official mandate really only focuses on government efficiency, and that is going to take some time to sort out. They will need to make assessment of government funding, and some of these freezes are really about that, assessing which programs are in line with the official policies and which need to be cut. Um, a lot of Nevertheless, Trump has already involved Musk in many foreign policy decisions due to a personal level of trust. So it seems that Musk is interpreting this trust very broadly. In other words, I don't believe Musk assigned him to meddle in German elections, to appear at the AFD gatherings, or to discuss history and historical connections with the Germans. I think that was his entirely own initiative. But because of his semi-official affiliation with the U.S. government, it's going to be very hard to discern which comments and actions coming from Musk are within his official mandate and approved by the U.S. government, which have official U.S. backing, and which are his own private sentiments. And I think that is going to be the biggest problem here, this potential political conflict of interest that could impact U.S. relations with those countries, simply because Musk has some level of involvement in official affairs. Regarding the rest of it, I think there is a deliberate effort to put some fear into other countries, basically to show that U.S. has the muscle, the leverage, that it can that it's returning to power moves. And in some cases it's appropriate, such as with the Colombian president essentially trying to avoid responsibility for individuals who crossed U.S. borders illegally. And let's face it, there is absolutely no upside to defending law breaking of any kind. But on the other hand, some of the other moves are posturing for the sake of posturing. And what works well in the business world, this sort of bluff, this sort of kind of chest beating, is not always appropriate for politics, and certainly not with one's allies, where a lot of tough conversations sometimes need to be had, but they're best handled behind the scenes and not in public. And that, I think, the administration is yet to learn. Many of the people there are not career politicians, they are business people. And so they are mistakenly projecting their business experiences onto international geopolitical stage. And I don't think this is necessarily a positive transition for them. It's also that there is a great distrust into taking advice from past politicians, because they are being sort of dismissed as deep staters, corrupt, swampy, business as usual, and so forth. But I don't think it's necessarily wrong to look at people's experience and see what is effective and what isn't in advancing U.S. interests.
Absolutely, absolutely, Irina. I thought Musk was taking us to Mars, but here it seems to be creating more mess. So from Mars to mess, we have to see how this all turns out to be. But let's look at another challenge that is coming up for the US is about the DeepSeek from China. China has suddenly changed this whole game in terms of artificial intelligence. How do you look at that? Is this a problem for Trump, or is it only for the problem for a few companies like OpenAI and others? How do you see this whole breakthrough into artificial intelligence by China? It's open, and I've seen it is quite good, not bad.
So Trump actually took this development with relatively comfortably and just basically encouraged US companies to become more competitive, which is always a good thing. I think part of the reason he is not as concerned as many are is because I'm not entirely sure that this, from the technological standpoint, this breakthrough is such a huge advance for China. It certainly is a shock because no one was expecting any advance at all. But considering that they trained a lot of their models on the models that are used by US, and considering that China has been at the forefront of adapting foreign intellectual property to their own uses, this should come as no surprise, and this has happened before. Specifically, I'm talking about the phone breakthrough Vodafone situation not so long ago, where essentially China stole intellectual property and was able to leapfrog around Western developments. I think the biggest issue with the DeepSeek is going to be the fact that it's a security threat adept at exploiting vulnerabilities and used for information gathering. I think it's not nearly as efficient as Western models yet. It certainly gives China an advantage in terms of trying to go around the AI chips issue, but I don't think it will eliminate the relevance of those chips. And I think there will come a point where AI on its own, generative AI, stops being all that effective, and you kind of have to go back to the chips issue. And I think independent of whatever China does, companies trying to improve and work on increasing the miniature chips will continue to work in that direction. I think there are limitations to China does. And finally, we should not forget that in the US, private companies are responsible for all that, and so results will vary according to the company, but there will be a lot of diversity and innovation. China did make a surprising breakthrough, but it was done with all of China's government resources put into one project, and that project was basically a result of all these efforts by all these companies, all of them linked to the government. So essentially, yes, it's one major breakthrough, but for that one breakthrough, US companies are likely to achieve a lot more, a lot faster, because they're not dependent on the government and because they move in different directions simultaneously. Whereas China put all of its all that it had on that one big innovation.
Absolutely. It's all about the chips, and let's see what happens. But the fact is, NVIDIA has lost billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in market capitalization. But from China's point of view, what have they achieved out of this? What is it that they are trying to tell the world?
I think for China, of course, the messaging is that we are coming after you. We are going to catch up, and we're going to be better than you in a short time. I'm not sure that's the case. As I said, they did better than they were expected, but they were expected to not be able to achieve anything at all. So in that sense, of course, this was an unexpected development. The question arises: why is it that U.S. was not able to detect what sort of direction China was working on, whereas China has very good idea of where US AI developments are at? And the other question is what impact it will have on quantum research and the quantum race taking place between primarily the US and China. Uh, so, considering how much China has borrowed from the West over the years, I wouldn't consider this uh, important development all that groundbreaking. It's basically a combination of three independent lines of research that were already being implemented elsewhere, and China's innovation consists in putting them all together, which means that other researchers elsewhere will also build on that level of inquiry in their own way and also um, continue and improve. Um, but the lesson in it, of course, is don't just depend on one particular block to try to keep China from catching up to the West. Be creative, think out of the box, and think where and in what direction a country that is limited in a particular direction will explore next. That I think is a valuable lesson to learn, but because I think the West has blind spots when it comes to restrictions, and we've seen that not only with China but with Russia, which was able to get around a lot of the sanctions by simply going to other buyers, other clients, or finding other routes for development. So instead of thinking very narrowly about the concept of preemption of any sort of breakthroughs, whether military, technological, or what else, we need to be thinking the way our adversary is thinking, and what we would have done had we been as limited as they are in that particular function.
Absolutely, absolutely. Irina, lots of business in this, lot of politics in this. But in the neighboring Pakistan, why are they sending people to, ISI members to Dhaka? And also, they have banned this whole new cyber law regulates social media. I thought this was the time for China to influence Pakistan, that they should use DeepSeek. And here they have regulated social media. It's a loss of business for China in that humor. If you look at it, how do you look at this whole development in Pakistan? Uh, is it politics, or is it much more beyond that?
Well, in Pakistan, business and politics come hand in hand, given that the military controls most of the private business, or at least enough of it, that it really leaves a mark. So it's not surprising that China would have a great deal of influence and inspiration politically. So, as it is, Pakistan still thinks in that the best way to prevent any sort of discontent is to by controlling and cracking down on the media. Of course, so far that has had exactly the opposite effect, pushing more people to side with populist leaders like Imran Khan, and to see the military establishment as corrupt and backwards. They're using very heavy-handed and outdated approaches to the sort of information and cyber warfare against their own population, and I think a lot of the younger people will find a way to get around that, quite frankly. To the extent that they're still trying to enforce these restrictions, they're not offering any positive narrative that would make it worthwhile for anyone to buy into. To compare it to Russia, which, by the way, is doing very much the same thing, Russia has a very clear ideological line, which is essentially power, quest for power, a narrative of greatness. Now, we can all agree that a lot of it is misplaced, outright fictionalized, and completely inappropriately applied, but nevertheless, that narrative is there, and a lot of people are buying into it and supporting the war in Ukraine, even if a lot of people are not. Iran has been very adept at selling various narratives to various segments of its population, the biggest overarching narrative being its theological quest to displace Saudi Arabia as the religious leader in the Middle East. Pakistan does not seem to have a narrative or a particular clear vision that it could get people to follow, whether by enticement or by force. So essentially, it's just basically cracking down on people for the sake of cracking down and not offering any sort of ideological sphere that they should follow. Yes, there's some nationalism in the ISI sector, but it's not producing any credible visions, especially when Pakistan is seen as selling out to China. Then all this talk of nationalism kind of goes out the window and is not very believable. As for Dhaka, the reason for spies doing what they do best, which is going and spying, is because Dhaka has become a place where Islamist fundamentalists have found a safe refuge in recent months following the uprising that overthrew Sheikh Hasina. Now, arguably, she was not a great container of fundamentalism. She literally, up until very recently, allowed them to entrench and grow, but she, at the very least, symbolically kept the lid. Now the lid is completely off, the Pandora's box is open, and assorted terrorist groups are flocking to Bangladesh to and to surrounding areas. And the same groups are also bringing together alliances from Africa to Afghanistan to Yemen. So we are seeing a great deal of convergence between groups that previously had only transactional alliances, now signing defense agreements, security agreements, intelligence sharing agreements, economic and trade and agreements that are bringing them closer together. And Southeast Asia is becoming increasingly at risk of destabilization thanks to this concentration that started in Afghanistan, is broadening itself through Pakistan to Central Asia and now in the direction of Bangladesh and outwards as well. So this is why the Pakistani intelligence was on the ground to follow and see what is going on.
Absolutely, what is going on. And in terms of, let's look at the Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal. What is going on in there? Stages are being released. Palestinian prisoners, they have also been released. So should we expect peace, or should we only look at it as a temporary calm?
I still expect the ceasefire to fail in short order. Right now, the convicts being released by Israel, they're not just low-level criminals, like marijuana sellers or people, small thieves. Or some of them are terrorists with a lot of blood on their hands. One of the terrorists released recently in the last couple of weeks was responsible for the murder of an American-born activist, Ari Fold, who actually saved somebody else who was being targeted by the same terrorist and sacrificed his life. Another terrorist was responsible for the lives of 45 people in two bombings back in the 90s. Now, arguably, this person is elderly and physically may not be violent, but most likely this is someone who's now in a senior position to mastermind and help plan potential future attacks, and certainly inspire by his example and kind of show that this sort of quote-unquote violent resistance works. Why am I saying that the ceasefire is on the verge of falling when one of the Hamas leaders in Qatar actually came out and said that they're willing to negotiate with the U.S. administration? They may not even want to continue in their governing capacity and would be willing to cede political ground to the Palestinian Authority. After all, isn't that what most of the international community wanted? The reality, first of all, this may not be a truthful discussion. It may be just an attempt to score cheap political points and support from the administration, many members of which are not professional politicians. And the special envoy on Middle East is a real estate guy. He will probably appreciate this sort of gesture, but that doesn't mean that this gesture is not being manipulative. But another reason for that is that Hamas could be preparing to focus on terrorism as opposed to having to struggle with governance, which was a failure. And there were mass protests in Gaza months before October 7th attacks. So you could say that terrorism became a sort of distraction and scapegoating and a cheap political victory at the expense of having to deal with real economic and governance issues at home. So that could also happen. But the really big problem is that there's likely a family that is long awaited by Israeli parents and two little boys who likely died. They are likely dead. They likely were killed in the early stages of the war. They did not survive. Hamas never indicated one way or another what their status is, but they are expected to be among the released hostages. But there is a possibility that, should it turn out that they are in fact not alive, and there's been no indication that they are, that the outrage inside Israel could be such that it could push Netanyahu's hand, or at least give him an excuse to resume combat with Hamas, and that is something that is a likely scenario.
Right, right. And what does the other war, Ukraine and Russia, look like? Putin and Donald Trump's meeting is yet to happen, if I understand. And then in terms of North Korea seems to be walking deep into this war, losing people, but still seems to be their weapons are flooding this whole of Russia Ukraine war, especially for the Russians.
Russian soldiers continue to advance, but at a very heavy cost. They're using basically human wave attacks, throwing soldiers and literally overwhelming the Ukrainian side with sheer numbers. But the equipment is mostly gone. They're relying on antiquated or primitive equipment to continue. And if Ukraine continues producing their own weapons and receiving outside aid, I think it is a matter of time that the critical mass could change in this equation. And surprisingly, Trump has not been aggressively pushing an immediate cessation of activities. He does still want to implement his peace plan. Russia has been thus far rejecting these advances. The meeting with Putin could be decisive in turning around the administration towards a more proactive help to Ukraine. Some of the commentary by Trump have been favorable to Putin, but and he has attacked Zelensky and blamed him for the war. But in terms of action, none of that has really changed anything. There's been a lot of very low-level information warfare attempts by the Russians, such as producing a fake account that claimed the head of Ukrainian military intelligence said that Ukraine could be done by June. But so far, there's no sign of that, and the administration analysts believe that getting to the point of diplomatic discussion could take at least a few months, which means neither side is sufficiently exhausted to sue for peace, so to speak. As far as the North Korean are concerned, most of them have been wiped out, but it is rumored that North Korea will send 10,000 more. They do want North Koreans to learn training, but throwing them into combat with no preparation whatsoever was probably not the best way to do it. At the same time, North Korea is taking advantage of the situation to provide Russia the support it craves and needs in terms of these weapons. Some of them are quite also antiquated, but something is better than nothing in such a situation, and this is positioning North Korea to become much more visible on the international stage at Russia's expense. And some of the impact that it could have is that a future outreach effort to Kim by Donald Trump could be rebuked, or could carry a higher cost than the last time he tried it. And Trump did express interest in doing so, but he's certainly in no rush to do so, because it's very clear that Kim is feeling a lot more confident while the world order is being rearranged, while Russia is losing its base in Syria as a result of failed negotiations with the Shias, North Korea is actually rising, becoming more independent and kind of becoming even less dependent on China and more needed as a key ally to some of these countries. It can play a much bigger role in the near future, with Iran and Russia extremely weakened by their losses in the Middle East, Ukraine, and elsewhere. So I suspect that North Korea could still become a major headache in providing weapons, including potentially nuclear material, to terrorist organizations and other state actors around the world, and also becoming stronger and more capable itself.
Absolutely. And very quickly, Irina, let's talk about the World Economic Forum at Davos. Is something, anything substantial coming out, not, or are such organizations now losing out on their appeal? How do you look at it?
Well, World Economic Forum was supposed to focus on economy and business, but somehow became a catch-all for very generic geopolitical trends. Not that any of those trends are necessarily inaccurate or untrue, but this, it is seen as a power grab by powerful billionaires and organizations that instead of focusing on providing economic solutions and improving the world, are instead looking to partner or rival governments in advancing geopolitical interests. So fewer and fewer people are engaged. Fewer people are coming or seeing value in something that's become quite common and repetitive among international organizations. This year, neither the head of state of China, Xi, nor Donald Trump were physically present at the forum, although Trump did address the forum virtually and proceeded to essentially berate the plans and by many of his associates there, essentially poo-pooing some of the biggest international um, agreements, such as the Paris Climate Agreement. He's withdrawing from that and just in general putting a lot less focus on the shibboleths that became kind of common among that crowd, including in particular climate related interests. So we're seeing a big move from that. Trump didn't shy away from taking that international stage and soapbox and using it to advance his own messaging, leaving a lot of the panelists quite shocked by his tone. But this kind of disruption is sort of natural, and to the extent that any forum should have a clash of ideas and a debate of ideas, some of these organizations have become entirely monochromatic in providing nearly identical perspectives from everyone involved. So I don't see anything wrong with having a little bit of a back and forth in that sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of The World According to Irina Tsukerman on the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for
Thank you.
joining us.